Good evening, everybody. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. It is 6:01 p.m. on the 1st of February, 2024. I am Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the planning board. With me tonight is our vice chair, Amelia Aboff, our clerk, Jahan Habib, and our members, Michael McNeely and Debbie Howard Easton. We have a number of items on our agenda tonight. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. The video recording of these proceedings will be available on the city's website or by emailing planning@somervillema.gov. This meeting is being recorded. So we have two cases, both of whom have requested continuances. So the 620 Broadway applicant has requested a continuance to February 15, 2024. The chair moves to continue that agenda item to February 15, seconded by Amelia. Raisa, can we have a roll call, please?
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Okay, that agenda item is continued. The next item on our agenda is 45 Mystic Avenue, who has sought a continuance to the May 16th, 2024 meeting. Chair moves to continue that agenda item to the 16th, seconded by Amelia. Raisa, please call the roll.
This is Raisa speaking again. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Okay, that agenda item is continued, and the only other items on our agenda are matters of other business. For the benefit of public, those items of other business are updates on the Davis Square area plan and an update on the ACE Fab districts. So I think we're going to let's do ACE Fab second. I'm not sure who's presenting on ACE Fab. Who is presenting on ACE Fab, by the way? And yeah, let's do ACE Fab second so we can have Sarah go first on Davis Square. So we can get Sarah out, because I'm sure she has.
All right, fair enough. Yes, I have nothing better to do than spend my evening with you guys.
Hey, we're a fun crew.
So I am hoping that you have all had a chance to review the document and actually come with a bunch of questions. So just as a update, so the public meeting that we had on Monday evening was in the West Branch Library in a room that was too small for the number of people that showed up, but everybody was good sports. We did have the session videoed, and it is on the city's YouTube channel. We've also provided a link to that and to the PowerPoint on the Summer Voice page for the Davis Square commercial area plan. There were lots of suggestions that came out, lots of conversations about potentially phasing the proposal that we call Elmway. Reluctant to use the term pedestrianization, which for those of you who remember the previous version of the plan was the term that we had used, just because there are so many other issues that need to be solved before we can figure out what that step is. And that is, sort of larger network mobility issues from bus routes to being able to two-way other streets. So it gets to be quite complicated, but generally that concept was very, very well received. There's a lot of people excited that the idea that the public realm becomes more public than just a tool for vehicles. So that was good news. We did have a lot of discussion about development projects and small businesses, in as much as the Scape and Asana projects, which have now are on hold while the economy goes through whatever adjustment it's going through. And what that comes back, what's made that difficult is, of course, they were fully ready to proceed and had started relocating, or the local businesses had closed or moved in those sites. So currently we've got a number of vacant spaces and don't know how long those spaces will be sitting there unoccupied. And so the discussion was, so what that does to the character of the neighborhood, and what we might be able to do as a city to help not just those businesses, because economic development has a lot of small business programs in place, but more also the character of the square. Can we encourage pop-ups in those spaces to make sure that there's still the street life continuing? Those were the those were the big interesting ones. I'm gonna say interesting there because, of course, the other one was that, sort of curse word of parking, as that's want to come up in many planning efforts. So the sort of the push and pull of understanding where the parking in the district is located, and if there is more of a district parking attention versus the on-street specifically in front of businesses. So there's a lot of work to be done there, but we had discussions around that too. So I think those are the top three that were part of the discussion. But I am here to answer any of your questions as best I can.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Because those three big topics are the three that I obviously were jumping out as I was looking at the plan, and the way I've always looked at what a revisioning of Davis Square could look like. The parking issue, we've looked at this, and you all clearly are professionals when it comes to this. We've looked at that as we've developed Assembly Square, and as we looked at a revisioning of Union Square and Boynton Yards, where we're taking it off necessarily of on-street parking and putting it more towards some of those more locus-based parking garages. I remember when we were thinking about I don't know where we are out now, would take, putting one, parking garage on one side of Union Square and one parking garage over by like the Reliable Market site, to say, okay, fine, you're not going to necessarily have on-street parking, but there are two kind of bigger garages that if you need to drive and park in, you have a centralized place to do it. We looked at that at Assembly too. It's like, where the lot's going to be, particularly where we've got the MGH lot that we have access to. We have all the, lots that are inside the separate buildings, with the acknowledgement that probably a decent amount of that surface area, lots are probably going to go away. Like, how do we mitigate this, and understanding that people, do will and can drive, despite the fact that there are other, ways to get around. Not everybody does those ways. So I think that's a good way to try to figure out where are we putting things in Davis Square to not shut it off from access to cars, but how to make it kind of more usable for all forms of mobility, and have more of a transit through, as opposed to on street. The Elmway thing is obviously, I think, the biggest question that I always had, and it seems like that's something that was shared by members of the public. That's going to be a huge undertaking to try to figure out how do we mitigate changing this. And I think I have two questions. I guess one question and two kind of thoughts. the two thoughts is, I think in the presentation, the two pedestrian streets that were pointed out were Church Street in Burlington, Vermont, and Washington Street in Downtown Crossing. I'm not sure either of those are necessarily appropriate comparators because Church Street is not the main thoroughfare of Burlington. It was already a kind of a side street, and there are plenty of other ways to get around and through the city of Burlington. I love Church Street. I think it's great. But it's definitely not, the main thoroughfare that Elm Street is. And honestly, neither is that section of Washington Street. There are plenty of other ways that you can go, east to west, in Boston, where you're not cutting off the main artery. So those are my two kind of concerns. My other thought was, have we considered generally the idea of making it a part-time pedestrian thoroughfare like we do on Mem Drive on Sundays, you shut it off. If the idea is to, foster people using the public realm at, probably at night, maybe not quite so much at lunch during the workday, but on weekends. Think about maybe shutting it off or limiting access for discrete periods of time when we expect that people are going to be out and about and wanting to use Elm Street as a kind of a pedestrian space. Have we thought about that?
We have talked about it internally, and there are times when that happens. I think Honk Festival, Elm
Yeah.
Street is shut. But the difficulty is at that point, it makes it more difficult for people who do drive to move around. And what it also does in that situation is push people onto neighborhood streets, which is not necessarily a great alternative. And so that's why we're exploring, and it might be one of the gentlemen that spoke on Monday talked about phasing. And so the idea that, sort of just like we had with COVID, it gave us the opportunity to sort of pilot closing down a lane. Maybe that's something that we can do in permanent phasing. There's also some ideas about design. So obviously it is always going to be accessed by emergency vehicles. That's
Right.
not even a question. But then, sort of how frequently do buses go through? How frequently does the loading happen for the businesses on Elm Street? So there's minutia, what sounds like minutia in the big picture is obviously critically important to those businesses and the transit riders. So I think we've got to explore those opportunities and sort of do a larger look to make sure before we make any decisions on what happens on Elm Street. There's a lot of legwork to be done about those movement patterns. And as we're talking about Elm Street, it's easy to focus on vehicles at the moment. A lot of the conversation we had that there's frustration that we all support around the connection of the community path. So one of the things we're struggling with there for bikes, and it's easier for peds, obviously, for the pedestrians, sorry. But for bicycles, the busway at the T station is MBTA land. So technically, as it stands right now, the community path cannot go through that area officially. And so the bike
Okay.
network plan has, sort of these neighborways around the area, which of course makes it a bit longer to ride, to bump around that what would be a direct path. So there's some work needed to be done there too, for the bike connection on the community path.
Interesting point. Yeah, because dealing with the MBTA and other stakeholders is always throws a wrench in plans. And the last kind of thought I had that was one that you raised that seems like was a topic of conversation on the Monday meeting, were the small businesses that have closed in anticipation of development that's right now not happening.
Right.
I remember when we were having discussions with the applicant and with the public on those two projects. One of the things that kept getting brought up was that a lot of certain of the tenants were happy to kind of move along and and do their own thing, and some of them were not, and without knowing who wanted to stay and couldn't versus who was okay with moving on. If I was one of those businesses that wanted to stay and couldn't, I'd be pretty upset to know that the space formerly known as mine is now going to be Billy's Pop-Up Donuts.
Yeah.
So I'd like us to think about how we make right to some of the folks that have been forced to close and leave. How do we and the applicant make a right to them? Because the economy is the economy, but that's not, I think, a satisfactory answer to people who were shuttered not of their own will.
No, we completely agree. And so that is something that there were two representatives from economic development there on Monday night to answer a lot of those questions. And so they heard the comments directly. And I think this is actually something that we need to consider citywide. Obviously, this is the example and the pressure because of the timing of this, sort of the project right now. But there's a lot of work going on with anti-displacement task force, and that is for the commercial spaces. And so that's looking at preserving local businesses and supporting them. But also, this was a piece that we hadn't really, I don't think that committee has dug into deeply. So that's an area that we're going to try to close that loop on and make sure that that's part of their work moving forward from a citywide perspective. I'm not sure where it'll go right now for Davis, but we're considering it long and hard, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of meetings and some research to see what other places are doing to address this issue, because this is one way, as unique as Somerville is in so many ways. I don't think the development pressure and then the market influences are unique.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, those are kind of my thoughts and my questions. So I appreciate you being here and being able to talk to us about that. I thought the slides were very helpful and the presentation was great. So
Good. Thank you.
Who else? Well, while we have Sarah, who else? Yeah, Amelia.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Lewis, for being here and answering some questions with us. I have a number of questions and comments that I wrote down sequentially as I read the plan. So I'm sorry they're going to sound a little bit scattered, probably in reviewing, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Can I ask you one favor too?
Mhm.
Even if there are bullet points, would you mind sharing them with us afterwards?
I absolutely be happy to.
Thank you. All right.
The big overarching thing that I wanted to discuss and welcome feedback from my fellow board members as well is I feel like I remember pretty clearly in 2019 when we were adopting the new code that there was all this discussion about the draft of the neighborhood plan that had been developed at that time and the sort of massing studies that had been completed for development limits and sort of appropriate height restrictions or height increases. And it was, I think, like reasonably controversial and there wasn't really alignment on it. And we adopted the new zoning with largely CC4 and MR4 in place in Davis with the idea that it was mirroring what the old zoning had said and the idea that we were going to return to questions of increased density in Davis when the new plan was finalized. And while there are some references to that in the area plan, it seems like that was largely moved out of the scope of this planning effort. And I think it's really important that as a city and as an entity like this entity, we continue pushing for like a better understanding of the type of upzoning that might be supportable in Davis Square. And I can just say, like informally, as a member of the development community, like knocking down a 2-story building to put up a new 4-story building doesn't usually pencil, right? So like you have to create an allowance for something that is meaningfully taller to facilitate that. And I don't want to see Davis Square change dramatically, but I think we all understand that because of its role as a commercial hub and transit node, that's a direction we probably will need to go in. So I'd just like to understand, it looks like there's sort of a study contemplated, but where we are in that life cycle, because I think that was an important piece that we left hanging a while ago.
No, that's a very good point, and it was brought up on Monday, for certain. And so the idea that we might be ready to actually zone taller was brought up. The question about the amount of MR that permits residential versus the CC was also discussed, and Councilor Davis was there and had we had consciously chosen to remove any reference to zoning specifically in the neighborhood plan, because that will be an entirely separate public process. And knowing that we had just, although it's, pushing 5 years now since we did the zoning, and zoning years, that's fairly short. The idea that we can revisit that area, and it does sound like there's a whole lot more interest in revisiting that sooner than later. So I think it will happen. It just wasn't, we didn't feel that this vision plan was the right place to sort of tackle that piece. But so noted, and definitely understood and agreed with.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because it's both aspirational, like forward-looking planning. I think that's something that I'm going to guess several members of this board would be interested in discussing, but also in a reactionary way. When these plans for a 4-story building that wants to be a 4.5-story building come up for us looking for special permissions, it's difficult to know what the guiding documents are that we should be referring to think about those in context. So both in a proactive and a reactive way, something that, thank you.
Sure.
Really appreciate the emphasis on mobility equity, and strongly agree with the comments about the need for EV charging. I know the parking conversation is a loaded conversation in a dozen different ways, but definitely one that I think is important, so long as we keep providing parking to make sure that we're encouraging that behavior. Quick note on the idea of one of the items on my list that I hope we'll get to discuss more this year is guidelines for public spaces. And I would just caution us against relying too much on designs for public spaces that are fundamentally stairs, that are seated stairs or stadium stairs. I'm really conscious of our city's goals for inclusionary design and equity. And I think that when a flat plaza becomes a tiered plaza, that's great for performance, but it's bad for a whole lot of user groups. And would just ask that we keep that in mind as we start thinking about like what the design brief for that space would look like.
Can I address that point specifically really quickly? Through the chair. So the Statue Plaza, we are stuck with a MBTA event. And so the thought in Statue Plaza for that idea of a stage or a sort of a raised area is basically a way to more effectively use a piece of infrastructure that we're kind of stuck with. So that's where that idea had come from. But I hear you loud and clear, and engineering is already doing from the previous draft in 2019, the ADA upgrades and starting to work on the sidewalks. So we haven't stopped working, even though the plan was on pause for a while. But the stage area was specifically to try to, let's call it, disguise the MBTA tunnel vent.
The narrative described that well, and the rendering and the precedent image both showed like much more like stadium seating type of things that I can imagine would make a larger swath of the plaza
Okay.
unusable for those with mobility issues. So I saw the big letters that were like, these are conceptual only, but just wanted to flag, because I think we're starting to, maybe there's two separate ideas there that are slightly different.
Gotcha.
Thank you. In the section about privately owned public spaces, I noted that there was some language about concern for coordination in light of future ownership changes for privately owned public spaces. To the extent that the design and some operational standards for privately owned public spaces are part of the scope of this board, I would love for us to think about how we can write conditions more effectively to try to help address that concern. That felt like something that we could be thinking about very much in reaction to that concern. So just wanted to note that is something to follow up on potentially.
Mhm.
And I noted the proposed electrical substation behind the Holland Street Head House as a new item that seemed like it introduced some interesting logistical challenges. My perception when we had the substation in Union Square come up over the summer was that the city might have liked to handle it better and differently, but through one way or another, we let it get to a point where there was really a crunch to approve it, lest there be real grid impacts. And so I was interested and eager to understand if we could, I don't know, help think about that earlier, socialize, whatever that's going to be earlier. I'm sure that's something that's already on your radar, but it was the first time I'd heard of it. So I thought I'd ask.
That is one of those issues that I have not dug into yet, and but I am flagging it right now on my list, and we'll look at that sooner than later. I do have regular meetings, well, myself, the director of sustainability and environment and engineering meet monthly with Eversource. So I will make sure that's on my list to bring up at our next meeting and follow up with you on that one.
Thank you so much. Just to the extent that it's going to impact the community path and the MBTA coordination, it feels like it's rife with fun issues to begin thinking about early.
Yeah.
And those were all of my comments. Thank you so much for taking the time to review this with us. I really appreciate it. And
Of course.
the team did to get this to this point.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Who else? Oh, we have Sarah. I see Michael's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be brief, because Madam Vice Chair continues to have many of the same thoughts I have, so she summarized a lot of my concepts. I just want to highlight and put a spotlight on that last comment around planning for the infrastructure. I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm sure this will also come up when we talk about rezoning, if that's to happen again. But this might be a really good opportunity to talk about not just power infrastructure, but also stormwater infrastructure. And if there is a time where we're potentially digging up streets or things like that, if that could kind of be incorporated into the plan, I think that would be a really good idea. And I think maybe that's that dovetails into my last comment, which is gonna be around opportunities for the city to promote some more renewable or sustainable infrastructure. I think there could be ways for us to include that in some of these redevelopments on private or public land for things like, I don't know, a solar canopy, or, you know, promoting the use of, you know, cement blocks that use carbon sequestration, or things like that, that could actually be, you know, good use cases, similar to how we have, you know, stormwater rain collection gardens to stimulate and promote more of that use around the city. This could be a great opportunity for us to do that as well in our plan. So I guess I'd conclude by saying I think overall this is all going in the right direction. I'm really excited about a lot of this new work. So thank you for spending your evening with us.
Of course. And actually, as an aside, I did recently a 4-part webinar series that was all about decarbonization in the for materials within the architectural and construction industry. So it's kind of fascinating. So the fact that you bring up, you know, sort of sequestration is a great thing. So it's of interest to me personally.
Love to hear it. Awesome.
Yeah, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, question to Director Lewis about the planning. First of all, I think it's a wonderful plan. It reflects both your hard work and also the hard work of many staff members who have been thoughtful and careful in considering the future of Davis Square. There's 2 items that I just wanted to highlight. The first one is around around the fact that we've talked about market conditions and we don't know what the future holds. One item that I'm always thinking about is when it comes to clean technology, lab space, you know, all of these areas that, you know, that I'm personally supportive of. I'm also looking for that diversity of offices, lab space, and maintaining that independent retail establishments in the area, because it not only is a vibrant commercial center for the city of Somerville and the wider region as well, but it's also a neighborhood for people who live and who may want to go to the post office, may want to pick up some eggs and milk and things of that nature. And it's really challenging to talk about the future and saying like we're going to strive to maintain this diversity. However, the challenge is that you know, the circumstances may move us towards one direction where it may be more, and this is pure conjecture, last space, and maybe taking away from other types of developments and other things. So I just want you to be mindful, you and your staff to be mindful of you know, of this consideration, because it is important to retain that vibrancy, because there are a lot of other squares and other commercial areas, which I won't name, that have, you know, in my opinion, have lost some of that for the folks who live, you know, adjacent to that commercial corridors, or those commercial corridors. So that's the first, that was the first item. I'm going to pause to see if you have any feedback or any thoughts about that.
No, thank you for that. And that actually hits the nail on the head. It's one of those things that is one of our most difficult balancing acts, I'm going to say, in as much as we, the city, do have control over the public realm, but a lot of the development projects that are brought forward are obviously from private property owners. So we can guide and assist and set in place rules and regulations of what we want to see. But you know, sort of very often we are surprised by what is brought forward. But yeah, very, very much so. The needs of a place and a neighborhood are first and foremost in our minds as we're looking at any of this potential redevelopment. So, and I actually don't like the word redevelopment necessarily, as you know, sort of it's more of a protection and an enhancement.
Absolutely. Thank you for those comments. And the second comment I wanted to make was really around assessing the pedestrian experience, and this is something that Mr. Chair also highlighted. I'm very much in support of, even if it's like the Mem Drive example, if streets or even certain corridors are cordoned off at certain times where it may foster a more pedestrian atmosphere, where people can walk around without concerns about traffic and all sorts of vehicles and other bicycles and other folks. So I would just want to mention that if that could be considered, I would strongly support that as well, because it would again add to the vibrancy of Davis Square, and also help make it more of a destination. It already is a destination, but we want to further support that. So that's the second comment, and that's all I have. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think as I said, there was one gentleman that spoke about phasing, and so I think that's going to be sort of the linchpin to figuring out how this works. So we had a suggestion that the market hall, for example, while that's been talked about over the years for I'm going to say decades now in Davis, and given the success of the farmers market, that perhaps the farmers market might move to Elm Street, as depending on what happens with the reconfiguration, so that it's actually in the heart of the neighborhood instead of in the parking lot off Day Street. And I thought that was a very interesting idea. So that sort of feeds into what you were both saying about the timing of events and closures and things like that. So I think there's a lot here to explore, and it's sort of Davis is important to sort of to Somerville in the larger region as a place. And you're right about it being a destination already. So I think there's a lot of things that we can investigate, but the idea that there were so many people that came out, and there are so many people who are passionate and creative that do bring forward really good ideas. Monday was, whenever you have to present in a public setting like that, it's always stressful, but at the same time, it was kind of heartwarming. There was great discussion. So thank you for all of this.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else want to raise any questions or comments to Sarah and the team? Okay. Seeing none. Sarah, thank you very much for taking some time with us tonight. And I think we're all looking forward to seeing the next phase of where we're going to be.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I am going to, we're leaving comments open so that people who weren't able to be in the room on Monday can look at the slides, watch the video. And so as there are more people that might have comments, we're going to keep that open until the end of February. And then I'm hoping that we can start on the comments and the edits, and to get this to you sort of either late March or early April.
That'll be great. Yeah. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
You can hang out with us for the rest of the night if you want.
I might eavesdrop.
Go for it. I'm looking forward to what Andrew's going to have for us. So with that, we're going to move on to the next matter of other business, which is the last item on our agenda, which is the ACE Fab status update.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity to provide an update on the proposed zoning changes to the ACE uses in the fabrication district. I'm not sure what update you're looking for, so I'll provide just a general overview of sort of what's been going on and what we're proposing at this time, and then obviously an opportunity for you all to ask some questions and provide comments. So we've had several community meetings around this zoning amendment over the last few months, and not much has changed in terms of what we have today. But going back even further, The proposed changes that we're proposing as an administration are based on recommendations from the Art Space Risk Assessment that was conducted by the MAPC in partnership with the Arts Council. The assessment includes recommendations, including zoning, but it goes beyond zoning as well. The proposed amendments that we've created or proposed are directly from that study. The proposed amendments to the ACE categories are meant to refine and redefine the use categories to better clarify the ACE uses that we want to preserve in the city and continue to expand through zoning. The main proposed changes include separating out the art shared workspace and arts education use category. So now there'll be two separate things, two separate ACE categories. Shared workspace is becoming arts shared workspace, and we're refining the definition to sort of remove those business incubator uses. So think tough tech, creative, those sort of R&D uses, and we're moving that to a new office use category called business incubator. So those uses aren't necessarily going away, they're just being removed from the ACE category. We've also pulled the co-working use out of ACE as well. So think like WeWork. I know those models have changed. We've also moved that to the office use category, as we, the study showed, and what we've been, seeing over the last few years is it really doesn't belong in ACE. So we've moved that out. So there's sort of two new office use categories at the moment that we're proposing with this amendment. The more recent change that we've worked on with ACE is redefining, or not redefining, just removing text from the design services, specifically software development. So we've moved that out as well and moved that to the general office use category. So it's not going to become a new category, it's just going to be nested within an existing category. And I'll get to more sort of the, what this means for the arts community in a sec. I'll just get through the rest of the amendment. The other major changes were repealing the current WorkLive studio, which is sort of the only sort of art housing that we have right now in zoning. And instead, we're creating an artist housing residential land use. That's going to be within the residential use categories, and now within residential housing. That's the new category. It's going to be a subcategory to that, which will now then create an actual live work dwelling unit. So it's going to be a thing that you put in a building, just like a regular dwelling unit or affordable dwelling unit. Just think of it as a dwelling unit with an attached creative studio. That will be allowed by special permit in the mid-rise districts. At the moment, that's the only district we're proposing it. We need more time to look at sort of how we want to handle housing and fabrication. That's going to take a little bit more investigation, because we know those zoning districts are meant to preserve those existing ACE uses. Housing could create competition potentially. So we want to be very careful with how we craft those regulations if we do go down that route. So that's really the proposed changes as part of this package. I will say that there is more to come. This is the beginning of sort of these changes to ACE and FAB. I do recommend you reviewing the Art Space Risk Assessment. It's very comprehensive and has a lot of great recommendations. And again, even beyond zoning that the city can do to protect artists in the community. Now, to get to sort of how this affects the artist community. Right now in fabrication, I mentioned that with the shared workspace and arts education use category, there's other uses that may be on the other end of the creative spectrum. That being the tough tech, green tech, think Greentown Labs, sort of Summer Nova campus. And that does create competition with artist studios. Higher revenues mean that they have more opportunity to go into a space and expand, et cetera, et cetera. It's sort of think of it as a loophole in a way that that's been going on. And we know that those uses have a place in Somerville's economy, but we also want to make sure that we do protect fabrication, because we know how much those districts mean to Somerville and the arts community, and are really innovative in terms of zoning actually protecting something. So we wanted to be very careful with sort of how we go about this, but at the same time, we're aware that this loophole is potentially could affect other fabrication districts in the city. So we're sort of creating further protections to the other fabrication districts across the city. So that does leave us with some other sort of zoning projects that we may need to examine, especially what happens to those uses that are within Summer Nova. That's on the table. We're exploring options. I know you're probably all aware of the amendment that's been proposed to create this overlay district. At this time, it's going through the land use committee. It will be going through you. Staff will, of course, provide any sort of a analysis or feedback at your discretion and the land use committee's discretion. But again, that's hands off at this time in terms of staff because we did not propose that. But it's related to what's going on, and we know the community, excuse me, is concerned and wants to make sure we're examining, excuse me, everything. Sorry about that, something went down my throat. So I'll leave it there. Any questions?
Did I see your hand, Amelia?
I do have questions, Mr. Chair, but if you wanted to begin, I don't want to interrupt.
Nope, nope, go for it.
Thank you, Andrew. So I requested this update after listening into a meeting that happened earlier in January. And frankly, what I feel like I learned at that meeting was it struck me as alarming. And your presentation of the sort of proactive steps that the city is taking on its own initiative to be more thoughtful about the Fab district makes a lot of sense and is somewhat reassuring, and the logic that you laid out feels very sound. But I'm left with a couple of questions that are, I'm sorry, going to refer back to this January meeting that maybe you can expand on for everyone else. My understanding from that is that as part of this, there are some areas currently mapped as Fab that would be taken out of the Fab zone and put into a new sort of tough tech oriented district. And I find that to be a troubling prospect. And I guess I wanted to say that for the record and as early as possible. And that's sort of one of two overarching concerns that I have. The other being, I think we all understand the process for submitting a proposed map change and the fact that the city sort of needs to let Summer Nova go through its process, and that city staff are not advocating for or necessarily supporting that, but there's a path with the land use committee where they get their day in court, so to speak, to like pitch it. And we're not there yet. We're at the planning board stage in the process. But a concern I have is that between the changes to the Fab zoning with this new innovation component that are being considered by the city and the Summer Nova proposal that isn't yet before us, that members of the land use committee or of the planning board or of the public could begin to see these as an either or. When in fact, I think it could be the case that neither of these is something we want, and we should be looking at some third option. So I guess this is a question. I'm sorry, this is such a big question, but like, is there anything we can do to try to present these as not two sides, like a choice that people have between this one or that one, but rather two separate processes? Because the framing of the meeting in January felt like it was saying, this is what the city is saying instead of Summer Nova's proposal. And I think that kind of positioning for the city to be seen to be like making policy changes on its own in response to private developer initiatives is a challenging precedent to set, even if it's just optics and it's not what's happening in reality. Sorry, I know that was a ton, and I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Vice Chair Aboff, through you, Mr. Chair. The great question. I really appreciate you bringing it up because it's complex and there's a lot going on. So I'm going to first address it in parts. So regarding the innovation district, I want to make it clear, we are not proposing an innovation district. We are exploring an option to potentially create an innovation district. Nothing's on the board. It's just an idea that has sparked with conversations as a option, like you mentioned. So nothing has been sort of on the table. It's just sort of been something that we've been discussing as staff, but we wanted to be transparent to the public about what we've been researching. That's why it was brought up at the meeting. Just to give you some context, with these proposed ACE and FAB changes, what it potentially does to some of those existing businesses in those fabrication districts, what's considered the Summer Nova campus, I'm going to just call it that because I think most people are aware of what that is. Those uses such as Form Labs, MIT Engine, Tender, etc. There's many that aren't considered the traditional fabrication or fit into the traditional ACE use categories, or more again, that sort of creative tech, tough tech sort of use. They're already in a gray area when it comes from an interpretation standpoint. These proposed changes in front of you related to ACE will most likely put those uses into a non-conforming status. That means they can exist, but that's all they can do. They can't expand, and if a space sits empty for 2 years, it's not permitted, it's not allowed. And that potentially puts a linchpin, at least in that area, in terms of what of those uses, in terms of their status for the future, potentially. Again, that's just, having these sort of discussions and making sure that we're looking at any sort of potential consequences down the road. We all know that zoning can have consequences that are seen and unforeseen. Again, this is us doing our due diligence. We recognize that we need to do something about that potentially, because we don't want to lose those companies, because they do have a big part of this economy, and we want to support green, sustainability and resiliency in businesses, especially companies that are pushing that. It's a sector of the R&D that is really sort of exploding, and Somerville has the potential to be sort of one of those hotspots in the United States. Think of it that way. The other thing is, yes, this proposed overlay district does a lot, and it's transformational. And as it was made aware at that meeting, this area of the city is not mapped, transformed by Summer Vision. It's mostly enhanced and preserved and conserved. And we need to make sure that we're, understand that, Summer Vision is our comprehensive plan and what that means. Of course, that will probably be brought up at future meetings. So they will, because this is an applicant proposed zoning petition, they, again, like you stated, Vice Chair Aboff, they will have their time before you and the Land Use Committee, and many different things may happen. I'm not sure, but this innovation district that we're proposing is not necessarily in response to that. It's just in response to understanding that these uses that exist in this area that take up more than 50% of those uses, you think of it that way, could potentially be halted and could go away if there was no way for them to expand. Now, obviously, there's other parts of the city where they could go potentially, and which is something that we're exploring. But we're aware that sometimes when an area is established, they like to remain there, right? That's their home, and they want to build some sort of community with related uses. We also want to make sure that we're paying attention to that, and that we're aware that they have arose because of the current uses allows for it to happen, even though we didn't really predict that to happen. In 2019, the ACE uses were broad for a reason, to reflect the broader creative economy in the city. So I think a third option is out there, but we're exploring it in terms of how we're going to handle that, because maybe there is a different sort of potential overlay district where 20% of uses has to be ACE, for example, but these more innovation related tough tech uses also can be there. We can't control the economy, and as we just were talking with Davis Square, there's obviously the economy is going like this, it always will. So we just want to make sure that we're holistic and comprehensive and examining everything, so that everyone has a place in Somerville's economy, and we're not, sort of, again, picking and choosing what we want in the city. But we should also make sure that we're listening to the community in terms of their concerns, because they're valid. They're very valid. Fabrication is a special district. No other city in the United States has something similar. It's very Somerville unique, which I think is awesome. And we want to make sure that we protect, again, those other fabrication districts that are also remain in the city. So I hope that helped a little bit.
No, it did, because in your articulation of it tonight, you definitely expressed a level of sort of proactive thought and planning on the part of the city that did not come through. It may not have been appropriate for the audience in that prior conversation, but all the same, I guess I would just encourage, as you continue to explore what the options are here, look at carving some, at least, of the new innovation concept out of existing commercial areas that are already something else, and not 100% out of the fab areas that everyone dug their heels in about protecting before, because I have a long list of things that follow because they're, but like one point that I wonder if we've considered is, for instance, like those tough tech uses will have utility needs that are not compatible, and building envelope needs that are fundamentally not compatible with the existing warehouse type buildings that they're in some cases. And the brick warehouse style of buildings is something that in 2019 everyone was up about protecting, because fab was not only about the arts but also about the feel of the neighborhood and the culture. And like, there's no reconciling the new energy code, a brick warehouse building, and a tough tech use after a certain threshold. So I think I'm thrilled to hear the way that you're thinking about differentiating those uses so both of them can be protected. But at least from my perspective, there's no magic about keeping a Raffi Properties tenant in a Raffi Properties building. Make them move across the street where there would have been something else. I mean, let's not. Anyway, I've said my piece. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Vice Chair Boff. That's very helpful.
Anybody else like to grab Andrew while we've got you? Once. Twice. Andrew, thank you very much for coming in and joining us and taking some questions, and I think providing some much needed insight and update on this. And I think we all look forward to seeing where we're gonna go next on these.
Sure, and just to give you a little bit of a sort of what we think is going to happen, we're hopeful that we can get this pushed through in the next 2 weeks. So it will be in front of you for a joint hearing with the Land Use Committee to further have this discussion and with the public. So we look forward to that and the opportunity, to provide more opportunity for us as staff to provide you some feedback. But again, we don't expect things to really change at that point. What's proposed at this moment will probably remain. Part of this, what we're calling Fab Ace 2.0. Again, Fab Ace 3.0 is also underway. More to come. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. I don't think there's anything else on our agenda tonight. Is there anything else that anybody would like to raise for the benefit of the meeting? I believe, and Risa, tell me if I'm wrong, I think our next meeting is a joint hearing.
This is Rice speaking. The next meeting is supposed to be a joint hearing with the Land Use Committee.
Okay. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. I get to spend it with all the people I love the most. So, all right. With nothing else on the agenda, the chair moves to adjourn, seconded by Amelia. If we could have a roll call vote, please.
This is Rice speaking. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Chahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Thank you all. Planning board is adjourned. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Here.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.